Hello and welcome back. Now it's time to continue with the performance test. Last time I was testing out this device with the game optimization service enabled, which does limit the total power usage of the chips. It also does limit the frame rate. It does reduce heat, but at the cost of reduced stability and reduced frame rate in the game. Now, when you disable the game optimization service, it does use the Qualcomm's default settings, which works really well on Snapdragon Samsung devices. It should technically help the frame rate with Exynos Samsung devices as well, but unfortunately I don't have a Samsung Exynos device, so I can't verify that at the moment. But I usually play my games with the optimization service disabled unless I want battery life. But since I usually use the battery bypass option, battery life is not a big problem since I have unlimited battery, since it uses the charger as power source. Now, in order to use the alternate game performance, you have to go to the lab options and you have to basically click on this little box here. This will disable the default Samsung game optimization service and it will use Qualcomm's default, which I would say is definitely much better for games and much better for frame rate. So if you want frame rate, you have to, or not, you don't necessarily have to enable this, but if you want frame rate, I recommend that you have this option enabled. Of course, it will increase the heat output, and I definitely recommend that you have some good cooling if you want to use this for a long time. Now, as for the other applications, I'll use the simple system monitor since it is very accurate, and if you want to do a test yourself, I definitely recommend this application since it does give you very accurate temperatures. One of the most accurate applications that I've seen. I have been using it for like 7-8 years now. It never disappointed. It works, and also have this little window as well, which will give us a deeper look at the frequencies, and also does give a GPU usage and frequency value as well, which is also very important. Now, the PerfZ, that's a plugin that you get in most Samsung devices, is good. However, I noticed that the frame rate output on the PerfZ is usually not as accurate. I don't know why. It does eat, I think, about 5 frames per second. So it's not accurate, but it will do the job just fine. So you just have to remember that the frame rate on the PerfZ isn't really as accurate, but it's roughly 90-95% there. So everything is set up now. Besides only testing Wuthering Waves, I'll also show some games that run in Vulkan, and you will see that Vulkan is, when we compare performance, Vulkan is so much better than OpenGL. Currently the main issue why the game runs poorly on most devices is the API. And I've done extensive testing. Every single game that I tested with OpenGL runs in some problems, while Vulkan and games that run in Vulkan runs fluidly smooth. I played 3 or 4 different games that run in Vulkan. None of them have frame drops at all, and some of them are much more graphically demanding than this game. When I say graphically demanding, Wuthering Waves on average uses about 20-30% of total GPU speed. Now, the 8 Gen 2 and Qualcomm has different governors, basically has different speeds. It does show 70-80% GPU usage, but the frequency is low. It doesn't use full speed. Basically uses the whole GPU but at a lower frequency, while other games use the whole GPU on full speed, and that's a big difference in the total FPS output. Now, since this is running in OpenGL, it means that not all 8 cores will be utilized for the game. Vulkan does allow every single core on the chip to go and to run. Basically, it does allocate the load equally to all 8 cores, which in return does reduce the heat output, and also Vulkan does push a lot of workload to the GPU, which in theory means, and in practical use means, that you should be getting a lot more stable frame rate if your device has a beefy GPU. Well, this is an 8 Gen 2, has one of the best mobile GPUs out there, so you definitely want to get more work done on the GPU. But besides that, the game has seen a bunch of updates, and honestly, it definitely is smooth. I'm not going to complain about the smoothness that much, since the game does run really smooth so far, and does run much better than it used to be. Right on the very start, on the release, where there were frame drops. Now, I don't really see a lot of them. I don't really see a lot of frame drops. The most disappointing aspect is that the game doesn't run in Vulkan. And I don't know why Kuro did... I don't know why Kuro didn't add Vulkan on the very start, since 90% of frame drops and frame rate related issues would be solved by simply having Vulkan, since literally every single device from 2015 or 16, I believe, has Vulkan support, and it just runs better. Performance wise, Vulkan is much better than OpenGL, unmatched. So yeah, that's one big, I guess, drawback of this game. Maybe they'll add Vulkan at one point. I really hope they do. Would honestly solve a lot of frame rate related problems for most of the players. But so far, pretty smooth. The GPU is at 66 degrees Celsius. The usage is 70, 74, 75, 78, 348, 295 MHz. It does go up and down, but you will see it never going above 400. I think 450 is like the highest I've seen on this game, which honestly is really low. That's very low GPU usage, and there is no bottleneck or anything. I'm also recording screen at the same time in 60 FPS 1080p and also playing the game. Doesn't seem to have any problems. So that's the first boss. I have gotten used to the keyboard and mouse a lot. Much more easier to play the game with a keyboard and mouse. But I think I fought that boss really well. Wasn't too bad. Let's go and do some more stuff. I've been also farming a lot. I've been also leveling up a lot. Let me tell you, the grinding in this game, well, I have to say it was enjoyable, definitely, but you have to level up the echoes, you have to level the weapons, the characters. I have so many characters already, and I'm kind of struggling with the materials, which is, I guess, my fault for actually getting so many characters, but I'm getting there. I also plan to do some character guides and gameplay, but I really want to make sure that the character is actually built before I do that, so that's why it's taking so long. However, I'm getting there, definitely, very soon. The RAM shown on the simple system monitor and the RAM shown on the Perf Z is kind of two different things. The RAM usage on the simple system monitor is definitely much more accurate, because the game does use about, on average, like 2.5 gigabytes of RAM. Then there is a system that uses 1.5, so we're looking at a total of around 5 gigabytes use of 8, which does correlate to what we see here, while the Perf Z shows 24% RAM usage, which I don't know if it's just like the total RAM usage of the whole device, or if it's just the game usage. I know that the simple system monitor just uses the default RAM value, which means it shows the total RAM value, while the Perf Z might be showing the whole thing, or it might be showing that the game is using 24% of RAM. Maybe it's showing 24% RAM usage of the game, which does kind of go to, I would say, yeah, it's there, 2 gigabytes, definitely, it's there, so maybe it's accurate, maybe both are accurate. I just personally don't really trust Perf Z that much, because there's been times where it's been really inconsistent, so but I still keep it there since in most cases it's actually fairly accurate. But yeah, the game on average does use about 2.4. At most I've seen 3.5, 3.1 to 3.5 gigabytes of RAM is the highest I've seen in certain areas, but the total RAM usage and the frame rate isn't really, it's not really correlating that much. The frame rate is usually the same across the game. Now there are some instances in some windows where the frame rate is capped by the game to 30 and 45 FPS, and that's where you will see that crossover between 30 and 60. It does have areas where it's physically limited by the game. I don't know why I should have. If I were a developer, I would just let everything run 60 FPS. For example, the map here runs in 30. Some of the windows and cutscenes run in 30. Some of the animations run in 45 FPS. So usually the frame rate fluctuations in my case are from the game being limited to 30 or 45 FPS in some instances. I don't know if that's done on purpose or if that's a bug, but that's just how it is at the moment. The temperature on the battery is actually not that bad. It's fairly acceptable. 25 degrees Celsius is pretty cold for a battery, so not a big problem. The GPU usage is at about 80%. It never goes above 80%. And the CPU usage is also 50-60%. Now, unfortunately, I've mentioned this on the very start, but the game doesn't use all 8 cores. It uses like half of the CPUs. In some cases, in some instances, it uses like 1 or 2 cores, but at most 4 cores, from what I have seen, which I guess is fine. It's better than using 1 core. Usually most OpenGL games use 1 or 2 cores. Some of them don't even have multi-threading enabled. This game seems to be using multi-core, but it is kinda all over the place. Mostly due to the API being pretty outdated, which is one thing that's... I think the single most disappointing aspect of the game is definitely the lack of Vulkan. I already said that, but... For example, Tower of Fantasy, a game I used to play, runs in Vulkan, and I've had stable 60 or 90 FPS, and that game is much larger than this game, has a lot of different other effects, and it's also made in Unreal Engine 4, but it ran much better than this game because of Vulkan. And I also played that game on a much slower device, and it was able to get 60 FPS on that thing. 60 or 90 FPS, depends on what I set. And since both games are in Unreal Engine 4, they're very comparable, so the comparison is going to be very accurate. Now, since I don't have Tower of Fantasy installed at the moment, I will show you a game that I played, a very good game later on, and you will see a big difference in the FPS. Now, the good thing is the game does run in 1080p, although I have FSR enabled, which does upscale. However, the upscaler would be completely unnecessary since there is more than enough GPU here for 1080p 60 FPS. So that's not a big problem. I just use FSR because it just makes the game look sharper. I mean, it does the job just fine, so no complaints from me from the FSR. It does work just fine. But so far, there is honestly, I personally haven't seen any lag at all since I turned off the game optimizing service, or should I say when I used Qualcomm's default settings. There's been absolutely no lag, but I can definitely feel through the screen that the heat is starting to slowly build up there. Now, I do have cooling, of course. I am not crazy to go full speed with on summer with no cooling. But the heat is definitely noticeable, much more noticeable than with the previous tests. And this is why I really like to use Qualcomm's default. It just eliminates any lag. It's also a good thing to have the default Samsung's optimized service, because it does really help out with heat output. The GPU temperature and the CPU overall temperature doesn't really go above 60 degrees Celsius when you have that enabled, but the frame rate definitely has a big impact. So if you really want performance, but at the cost of a lot of heat, and I'll be dead honest in a second here, it's getting warm to the point where it's, for me, kind of uncomfortable to look at the temperature, even though it seems to be able to handle it. It's built to handle it. I still prefer the temperature to be, you know, a little bit lower, even when I turn on that Qualcomm's default. It does definitely deliver the performance though, so if you don't really care about the heat, I guess it's nice to have, or if you really want maximum performance. But again, be careful, since it's definitely is toasty for my standards. It's toasty for my standards, so you definitely want to try and keep the thing from exploding. I mean, I say that the exploding part was mostly a joke. Obviously, it should not be exploding. That's the Note 7 days are long gone, hopefully. I mean, I haven't had a phone explode on me yet. I've had phones burn, but I haven't had, when I say burn, I mean the chip died. I've had that happen to two of my phones, I think. I burned the GPU on my last phone, I burned the GPU on the Note 8 Pro, I burned the GPU on the Poco F3. Hopefully this thing is not going to suffer from the same problem. Well, I mean, those two previous devices did not have the same treatment as this one. I'm treating this thing very well, so it should last long. Anyway, so far I would say pretty smooth. The most of the frame rate dips are because of no Vulkan support, since OpenGL. I mean, I'm trying to figure out why did Kura not add Vulkan support, or at least make it like optional in settings where we can switch between OpenGL and Vulkan. It would be pretty nice to actually have that, but so far I can't really complain. It runs smooth, it's pretty smooth, and no lag, no frame drops. Well, I say no significant frame drops. There hasn't been any stutter, any freeze frame or stuff like that. It's been pretty smooth so far. Let's do Tower of Adversity. And it's basically when I remember that Tower of Fantasy exists. I used to play that game a lot. It was still a pretty good game, unfortunately. Just I don't know why I stopped playing Tower of Fantasy. Maybe I should just do a test on it as well, just to compare the performances, but I don't know. I kinda liked the game a lot when it was released. I played it for a year, I think, and then I think the grinding was definitely the thing I couldn't do, because there was just I think the way to obtain stuff in that game was not really, I guess it was just way too much time consuming. I think that was the case. It's been a while since I played it. Maybe they changed it. We will see what. Maybe I'll check it out at one point for sure. But so far, the game does run okay. And yeah, if you want to test out your phone's GPU performance or graphics performance, this is definitely not a game that is a game where you want to test out graphics on, since GPU frequency 295, 348, that's like default. That's default clocks. It doesn't really push it to the limit at all. And you will see what I'm talking about in this video when I finish up with the Wuthering Waves part, since I really want to show you the difference between the APIs and just to show you what's graphically demanding actually kind of looks like on the hardware, since at the moment, while the game does look good, and I'll give the developers credit for one thing, they definitely made a good looking game run fairly easy on, I would say on most devices it should run fairly easy, since it barely uses any GPU on this thing. So you should not be worried about the graphics of your device. If you have like a Snapdragon 870, 865, 850, even 855, you should be good for this game when it comes to the graphic performance. One thing where you might encounter a problem with is definitely the API, which is OpenGL. Now the CPU cores, the 4 medium cores, are definitely working. However, they are not really, well, the PerfZ shows that they are in the red, but at the same time they're not really going full speed. Full speed is 3.36 GHz, and you only see that value when the game is loading, and in some rare instances when I'm moving around. Okay, let's do one more little boss battle, and then I will show you some of the other things that I promised. But so far it's been definitely more stable. Absolutely no stutters though. That's, well, at least no stutter that I've seen. I have been mostly focused on defeating the bosses. I've been mostly focused on playing. Didn't really notice any significant stutter or lag myself. And there you go. The GPU, no, not the GPU, the CPU did go at full clock there. But the GPU is barely doing anything. It's just 70%. 348 MHz seems to be the usual value that we see. 401. It's very interesting to actually look the clocks go up and down. If the game were running in Vulkan, you would definitely see the clocks go up a lot higher, and you would see the CPU clocks go down, since the load would be allocated to all 8 cores equally. That's one of the things that makes Vulkan so good, because it actually makes the heat output much less. And fun fact, now the GPU temperature seems rather high, but that's not really coming from the GPU, since it's impossible to heat that much on such low clocks. The heat on the GPU is coming from the CPU cores, and I actually did do some tests, and the CPU does get rather warm on this game, because again it's not really 2 or 3 cores are doing all the work, which does tend to make things go toasty. But overall, that was pretty good. pretty overall happy with how the game runs. There is definitely a lot more room for improvement. There is definitely a lot more room for improvement when it comes to performance. But so far, it's okay. Much better, runs much better, and looks much better than some other games of the same type. Now, I said that I will also do a little comparison between some other Unreal Engine 4 games, open world games, and I'll give you some short examples of the Vulkan API in action. Now, this is X-Asters, a game that was released last February. It's a pretty good game. Recently, it received a graphical overhaul. Basically, they enhanced the graphics, fixed cutscenes, added more quality, and good stuff like that. So, these developers definitely did very nice work with the game. This game runs in Vulkan by default, and it's made in Unreal Engine 4, has about the same engine, same version of the engine, and does have about the same options, has upscaling tech, has it all. So, let's see how the frame rate looks, and let's see that Vulkan in action. Also, most importantly, let's see that GPU in action. So, as I mentioned before, the maximum clocks on the 8th Gen 2 are 680 or 719 MHz if you are using the for Galaxy 8 Gen 2, which I have in this thing at the moment. And right away you can notice significantly higher GPU usage. The frame rate is also stable 60 FPS. It's flat 60. You will rarely see any drops. The only drops that happen is at the very start when it loads, but when it finishes loading, it's flat stable 60. It doesn't budge at all. It's 60 FPS and doesn't go up, doesn't go down. It's a flat line 60. But you can take a look at the monitors. The game does use all 8 cores. The processing load is basically allocated on all the 8 cores on the chip, therefore reducing the overall frequency and improving the efficiency of the chipset. Basically reduces the heat output while improving performance. And I picked this map since this is one of the more larger maps, very large map actually. GPU 615, 550, 90% load. Yeah, it is going full speed 680. And when we look towards the big tree, the GPU hits 790 MHz, which is full speed. So yeah, very comparable games, since both are in Unreal Engine 4, both are open world. The only big difference is the API between the games. Flat 60 FPS, all 8 cores work. This game uses a bit more RAM though. It peaks at 5 GB of RAM. This is a very, very RAM demanding game, and I've actually had to enable that RAM expansion in order to be able to complete the game with recording. Crashed many times with only 8 GB of RAM. So yeah, that's this is how Wuthering Waves would run if it had Vulkan support. Vulkan solves everything, honestly, and this is a nice little example of that. Yeah, absolutely stable FPS, and all 8 cores are working. The game is not free though. This costs about 10 USD or 10 euros, but I honestly recommend, if you want to play a single player game, give this game a chance. It's pretty fun, and the story is actually really, really good. I'm not gonna spoil anything though. So, that was a little test in X-Asters. Now, another Vulkan game that I played, War Thunder Mobile. fairly fresh game, also supports ray tracing, but this is a fantastic GPU test, and of course this is one of the, if not the most demanding game on mobile at the moment. Runs in the same engine as classic War Thunder on PC. And you also have 120 FPS support, ray tracing, runs in Vulkan. Take a look at the monitors here. All 8 cores are working. Yeah, all 8 cores are working. The GPU hits 100% and is going full speed, 719 MHz. Watch the temperature though. I have so many monitors, I forgot to mention the temperature. Watch the temperature, just look at the temperature. It's rising and that is not gonna fall down. So, I'm about to miss. Yes, I am. Yep, that was horrible aim on my part, but the game does use about 2.5 to 3 gigabytes of RAM. Usually that's the number that you can expect. All 8 cores are going full, well, not full speed exactly, but all 8 cores are working. And the GPU is also working as well. Usage 100%. Frequency is also pretty stable at 719 MHz. This is what a properly optimized game looks like. Or should I say, this is how a game made in Vulkan looks like. And you might be wondering, well, why are you playing different games on a Wuthering Waves either? Well, since we are already comparing performance, might as well show you the difference between the APIs, since unfortunately OpenGL is still widely used more than Vulkan, and OpenGL is the reason why everything runs so poorly nowadays. Well, I say everything, not everything, but Vulkan would improve performance by a huge margin, and that's just a fact. And the GPU temperature well over 80 degrees, lovely. So, just to show you that I'm not making anything up here, API Vulkan resolution 2540 by 1080, and yeah, this is again X asterisk with the same map here. FPS 60 FPS, very stable. So I also forgot to enable the monitors, but let me quickly just turn them all on. So in conclusion, the performance of Wuthering Waves is okay. I cannot say that it's flawless, since there is obviously a huge room for improvement when it comes to the frame rate, and there is absolutely no reason why the game should not be able to run in 60 FPS for 90% of players. However, that problem will not be solved, not just in Wuthering Waves, but in other games of the open world type. That problem will not be solved until developers start to make their games run in the Vulkan API. That's been the case for a very... It's kind of embarrassing to have to mention this in 2024, since Vulkan's been out since 2015-16, and even then Vulkan was a huge jump over OpenGL when it comes to the overall graphical performance of mobile devices in games. There is a reason why Vulkan exists. It's there to make things run smoother. And I'm not really angry, I'm just, I guess, a fair bit of criticism, and I hope that that message floats to the developers, since API, when I'm starting the game, OpenGL, while the other two games have been running in Vulkan. But yeah, that will be the performance test for today. I definitely wish I had more devices to test the game on. Unfortunately, I don't have many devices. The previous devices that I used, they all, well, they're not no longer in working condition. Let's just keep it at that. But overall, the developers have, for the most part, fixed the significant dips, the major frame drops. That's been fixed, and now you can actually expect higher frame rates. However, the lack of Vulkan API support, the lack of proper multi-core support is what's holding this game down. And that problem will be persistent until the game does get proper multi-core support and proper Vulkan support. A game like this needs that because it's a big game and you really want every single core to do work, since it's make a big difference. It's making a huge difference on the total performance output, and of course it's actually making the GPU work, which will make the game run smoother. And when it comes to the RAM usage, well, on average, I mean, I already mentioned the RAM usage doesn't really correlate to the frame rate. However, it can lead to crashes. Low RAM usually leads to a crash, but in this case, on this device, for example, that wasn't really a problem, except with X-Asters. And just to compare the memory usages on all the 3 games today, Wuthering Waves 2.4 on average, War Thunder Mobile 1.9 and X-Aster 1.7. Again, that's just the current, on the current maps that I played. War Thunder Mobile and X-Asters can eat up to 5 gigabytes. War Thunder Mobile up to 2.4, 3.1, 3.4, about that, but overall the RAM usage is roughly the same. And with that being said, that will be it for this little test today. Hope that I helped, hope that I could clear out some things, and with that being said, I may do more tests like this in the future, because I would say they're pretty fun to do. And if you would like to support me, feel free to like and subscribe, and with that being said, stay safe, as always, I'll see you next time.